We have got our next speaker, so please put your hands together and welcome Mr. Johnathon Shafi. Woo!
Well, thanks very much, and thanks to the organisers for a fantastic event today. I think they do deserve many rounds of applause, but they do deserve a round of applause to start with for the event that they've put on. And they've asked me to say a few words about foreign policy and about what sort of foreign policy we should be looking towards when we win our yes vote in September the 18th. And we might look at the century so far. In fact, many people my age or around my age got involved in politics because of the Iraq War. On March the 10th of 2003, when they set Baghdad ablaze, we had been involved in one of the biggest mass movements to grace the world, the anti-war movement. And the government ignored us. They ignored us. They ignored the working class people they sent off to kill and die in Iraq, and they took the side of George Bush. That's what the British government did. And the legacy of that war for the people of Iraq is ongoing. A humanitarian disaster on historic levels. We have seen torture in Iraq, given that they were dominated by Saddam Hussein, worsen. That's not according to me, that's according to the human rights watchdogs which are in Iraq around that time. And we have to say something else about what's happened to the people of Iraq, because one of the slogans that percolated its way, not just in the UK, but right across the world, was "No blood for oil." Blood was shed. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. The oil was privatised. Oil, money, political power put before human life. Something that we have seen time and time again. And that's what happens if you have a foreign policy based on exploitation, on domination, and on imperialism. And the British state have been central to that. Now, foreign policy, of course, when you think about it, you think of things like war, of military expenditure, and so on. And I'll always remember Gordon Brown at the time when the firefighters and the FBU were on strike, and he turned around and said to them that there was no money to invest into people who put out fires, into people who save lives, but there was a blank cheque to start an almighty fire in Iraq, an almighty fire that has spread across the region. We have been proven right on every argument, and they did not. You can clap that if you want. But they did not manage to find it within themselves to fund the services that we need. So while they're cutting the services, there is always a blank cheque for war. That's always the way it's been. And around a few years ago, I don't know if people will recall, but the Diageo distillery in Kilmarnock was shut down. That was about 600 jobs that were lost. And I was part of a support group of people who went along to that factory in order to say that we wanted to help provide support for those people who were losing their jobs. And so we set up stalls and we set up a campaign. And I'll always remember that the very day the news was announced that the factory was under threat, in the town centre of Kilmarnock, the army moved in. And they went and they tried to recruit people to the army. Now, I've worked with many military families who opposed the war and who have lost sons and daughters in that war. But one thing that we must stand against, that one thing that we must craft as part of our foreign policy, is an end to economic conscription, because that's what it is. If you don't have the opportunities, if you don't have the money, why is it the people that are exploited at home are the very same people who are chosen to go and kill and die in foreign lands for adventures run by the government and the corporations which back them? Halliburton, Esso, ExxonMobil, all of them. That's what imperialism is about. Now, one of the other things that we have to say about this is that what you do abroad, what your country is known for abroad, also has an impact on what happens inside your country. And you couldn't have had a war on terror. You couldn't have had a war in Iraq unless there was a strategic, a deliberate attempt to demonise the Muslim community. And that's what they did. The Labour Party, culprits in this. Not just culprits, but leading the way in terms of demonising not just the Muslim community, but whipping up racism as a result of their wars. Now, when we think about this and we think about it in today's context, what do we see? We see an argument being put forward by Better Together, an argument being put forward by the Labour Party, that somehow we stand for narrow nationalism, that somehow we oppose internationalism. Well, if this is the internationalism of the British state, if this is the internationalism of both Labour and Tory governments, then I want nothing to do with it. And we fight for an internationalism that puts people first, that doesn't put the corporations first, that says that we oppose war, and instead, in that place, we fight for a foreign policy that has something much different to say. Not just that we work hand in hand with our neighbours as good neighbours, but that we say something more, that we say that we stand with the oppressed across the world. Now, George Robertson has been mentioned already today, and he made a speech, as you'll all know, about dark forces and about cataclysms and about these kind of things, but he also said something else. He divided the world up into ordered countries and disordered countries. And the ordered countries are America and Britain. He didn't say who else might be an ordered country, but those were the two primary countries which he regarded as ordered, that brought order to the world. But how ironic is it that those are the two countries, in tandem, the British state and the American state, who have brought nothing but disorder to the lives of millions of people, right across the Middle East, right across North Africa, not just in the last 10 years, but since they've been set up. That's what we're faced with. Now, given everything that's happened, given the situation that we found ourselves in over the last 10 years as a result of these kind of processes, I want to say today that George Robertson, I challenge you to a debate. I challenge you to a debate over the question not just of Iraq, but about where this world's going. Because this world is going into a period of crisis. Now, I want to qualify this. One of the things that we often hear throughout this debate is what you might call Scotland-centric, and I can understand that. We are talking about Scottish independence. But we must place Scotland, if we're talking about foreign policy, if we're talking about building bridges rather than destroying people's lives, we must also put Scotland in an international framework, in a global context, so that we might understand how best we can take our place in the global family of nations. Now, the global economic crisis that so many of us are faced with is punctuating a political crisis. It's punctuating the tensions that we see emerge between the leading nation states. I and many others protested in Auchterarder in 2005 against the G8. Now, if you'd turned round to any of us and said, do you know that in a few short years Russia won't be welcome at the G8, we would have laughed. It was the Gang of Eight who we were protesting against. Make poverty history, we said back then. Now, the fact that we are seeing a whole series of events take place which lead towards a fracturing of the international community means that we have a choice to make, and the choice is stark. Are we going to continue down the road of imperialism, of adventurism? Are we going to continue down the road of peace, so-called, through superior firepower? That's what George Robertson's argument is really about. It's about saying the only way, this is his view, the only way that we can have order, the only way that we can have peace in the world is through the dominance of Anglo-American imperialism. And we have to reject that whole scale. Now, when he talks about cataclysm, I will say something that may be provocative here, but he does have a point. And I want it to be cataclysmic. We should want it to be cataclysmic on the project for the new American century and its aftermath with the Obama drone wars, which some of you will know about. We want to create a situation where there is a defined, where there is a definite orientation, reorientation for Scotland as a nation away from military adventurism. And if we manage to do that, if we manage to do this, not only will we be seen as global leaders for peace, but we can start to open up new ways of doing trade. We can start to open up the whole question of foreign policy being linked to a holistic re-evaluation of what it means to be progressive in the world today. Now, foreign policy, as I said before, is often viewed in terms of war, defence, and so on. But those at the cutting edge of the foreign policy debate, those at the cutting edge of the arguments around foreign policy will also say something else. Foreign policy has to include what do we do about the crisis facing the world on the question of inequality. Now, you'll know the statistic, but 85 of the richest people in the world, their combined wealth, exceeds the poorest 3.5 billion people on the planet Earth. That is a question for foreign policy. You won't hear it from the foreign policy makers in Westminster. You won't hear it from the foreign policy makers in the White House or in the CIA. But it is a foreign policy issue because it stems from our relationship with the world as a whole. The environmental crisis is also a foreign policy issue. Now, if we take for granted that we are going to be building, after the yes vote, a nation which wants to take its role in the world on the basis of peace and the basis of cooperation, then we also have to start to integrate into our foreign policy agenda these wider narratives. Because we have been told for so long we have been told that foreign policy decisions should be made by foreign policy experts. The foreign policy experts over the question of Iraq and since have been the people. The foreign policy experts have been the anti-war movement. They have won on almost every single argument. In fact, on every single argument, we have won in that particular context. Now, we talked about jailing bankers earlier on, and it got a huge resonance with people here. We also have to talk about justice. We have to talk about how we might overcome, detoxify Britain's imperial role in the world. And I think there's no better way of doing that than saying that we advocate war crimes tribunals for Tony Blair, war crimes tribunals for George Bush, and not just as a point of rhetoric, but because this must happen for the world to move on. This must happen for us to reorientate our foreign policy strategy. This is vitally important. Now, we talked about, so far, a 21st century economy, an economy that works for people. And here I want to make this point. The economy is not separate from foreign policy. Now, most people here might know this, but we have to start to drive an agenda that says, actually, what's happening with the economy directly impacts what's happening when it comes to the question of war. Look at the amount of money that is made whenever a war happens. Now, the United States, its economy, is almost entirely based on the military-industrial complex. In fact, if you were to take away military spending from the US economy would collapse. It tells you actually that at the root of the economy, that at the root of the cause for war is an attempt to scramble for resources and to shore up their economy. And if we are going to build a new foreign policy, it means that we have to build a new economy. Now, none of this is going to be very popular with Whitehall. None of this is going to be very popular with Westminster. And here, I think we do need to do some finger-pointing. I blame Westminster for the mess that's been caused. I blame the Labour Party for the mess that's been caused. I don't want to hear anymore the Labour Party being able to turn round and tell people they are friends of the working class. I don't want them to be able to turn round anymore and say that they are the champions of internationalism. No, it is we who are the champions of those causes. And we do so not just by our words, but by our deeds. And that's why one of the deeds which will be so important after winning a yes vote is scrapping Trident. Because through scrapping Trident, not only will we be able to reinvest the money away from the military-industrial complex and into our public services, but we'll be able to start to think about how we promote an internationalised, a globalised message that says an end to the way the world has been run up until this point, an end to the chaotic misrule of conflict between states, because this conflict doesn't just involve politics and politicians. It doesn't just involve policymakers and think tanks. It always involves the people who suffer as a result of their policies. Now, the last couple of points that I want to make. All of this has an impact on our society. It has an impact, as I referred to earlier, on race relations, on the demonisation of particular communities. It all fits this narrative. Austerity and war go hand in hand. The question of divide and rule, of scapegoating, of demonising, when it comes to the question of austerity, is the same process when it comes to the question of war. And I want to say here how much a privilege it is to be part of the biggest social movement that Scotland's ever seen, and to have never experienced, to have never heard of, an incident whereby someone has promoted a racist point of view, an anti-immigrant point of view, a point of view that seeks to scapegoat. Now, it seems to us in this room that that should be obvious, that that's the nature of this movement. But that's bucking the trend. It's bucking the trend not just in the UK, but Europe-wide. We are doing something here throughout the process of this referendum, which is going to have an impact after. And that's why, whatever party you're in, the most important thing, I believe, is about the people themselves, because those are the people that can shape the future. And on that, I'll end with an initiative that the Radical Independence Campaign has been undertaking. We've decided since our last conference in November that while the conferences are good, we need to start making an impact where it really counts. And that's in the communities, right up and down Scotland, who have been scarred by austerity, and the communities right up and down Scotland who have been used as cannon fodder for too long. Now, we started a process of what we call mass canvassing. We get loads of people, we go into an area, and we make an impact in that area. We speak to as many people as we can, but not only do we speak, we listen. And we tell people that for the first time ever, for the first time in their lives, this is a vote, not for a party, and it's also a vote where their opinion matters. Now, we've seen a lot of demonstrations take place all over the UK. I've talked mostly about the ones against the war, but we've also seen ones against tuition fees, for example. And every time there's been a democratic upsurge, the politicians have ignored us. Now, the Lib Dems are paying the price for it just now. But whenever there's been a democratic upsurge, it's never been met in formal politics. Well, here's our chance to do that. Here's our chance to bring about this democratic revival, the points that are being made throughout that, the points about social progress, against austerity, against war, for a new foreign policy, and make it something tangible. And that's the message that we are taking to people. Now, on the 22nd of June, we are calling a national mass canvass. And we want all over Scotland, everyone on that day, to get involved in an event in their area and to go into a community and to say, the world can be different. The world can be different if you become involved in this movement. When we go to vote on September the 18th, I will be thinking about Iraq. You might be thinking about a whole number of things. Everyone has their reason. But don't you think it's something quite unique, that given the diversity, given the breadth of the movement, that we can all agree on some sense of there being a narrative, that we've had enough of the way Westminster's run its affairs, that we've had enough of our special relationship with the CIA. Now is the time for us to think about how we can move forward. And moving forward means starting now, shaping the process over these last 16 weeks, and after winning a yes vote, using that as a platform to deliver a nightmare for Westminster and a dream not just for Scotland, but for the peoples of the world. Thank you.